Ridge. Welcome to another edition of After Hours. Today I wanted to talk about three different aspects of God's law. Now that's a little distinct. On Sunday I mentioned three uses of the law, that the law is useful for giving us understandings of what our laws ought to look like that govern our interactions in society with one another, how the law convicts us of our sin and points us to Christ, and finally how as Christians the law is useful as a guide to holiness and love and integrity to show us how the Spirit's working in our lives. But today I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about three different aspects of the law, what are known as the ceremonial, the civil, and the moral aspects of the law. Now, this is really, really important because sometimes when you make the statement and the argument like we've been making in recent weeks that God's standards do not change, that in fact holiness and love and integrity are the same always, people come back and say, well, then I guess you don't eat shellfish, or you don't sow two different types of seed in the same field. You don't wear garments made of two different types of cloth, or you believe that we ought to stone adulterers because, well, those things are in God's law. And it becomes a question of, well, how do we answer that? What do we say? And actually, this is not something new. The church has had this answer for millennia. It has always been there and recognized down through the ages of the church, but it's something that's regularly brought up. For example, a couple of years ago, I couldn't sleep one night. I was up late, and I happened to see that there was going to be a debate going on Larry King regarding, in this particular case, it was regarding same-sex attraction and homosexuality. And a Christian artist who I actually had liked had declared that she was a lesbian, and she was having a debate with the pastor. And in the debate, she asked the pastor, and she said, well, do you eat shellfish? Do you think that that law is still there? And to my chagrin, I broke down and almost cried. The pastor said, well, God changed his mind. I didn't know what to do other than think that obviously he must have been asleep the day they were teaching Bible in Bible college and seminary, because that is not the Christian answer to that question. Rather, the answer is there are three different types or three different aspects of the law. First, there is the ceremonial aspect. This deals with food and clothing, seed and fields, and all these kind of things. This is not based on God's character. If you just think about it, whether one eats shellfish or not has nothing to do with moral character or anything about God being holy, loving, or full of integrity. They were rather meant to give a visible picture to Israel of the separation that was required, how they were to be distinct from the nation. It was pictures of spiritual truths. And we know for a fact in the New Testament, in Mark 7:20, for example, Jesus declares all foods clean. The ceremonial aspect of the law was fulfilled by Jesus and no longer has any application to us or any direct oversight of us. It's no longer in effect over us because, again, it's not based on God's eternal, unchanging character, but rather it was specific ceremonial things that were given to Israel. There's a second aspect to the law, which is the civil aspect of the law. This was the actual civil laws that governed Israel. And we have to remember, Israel was a theocracy. They were not a nation that was combined of both people who claimed to be part of the people of God and people who did not claim to be part of the people of God. Everybody in Israel was supposed to be part of Yahweh's people. That's what it meant to be an Israelite. And they were actually a theocracy. And so these laws that were taken would take moral aspects of the law and then they assigned specific penalties to them. Sometimes they were even just for other things. It was regarding whatever you were going to do. But for example, this is where you would find out that there were penalties ascribed to those who committed adultery or some other form of sexual sin, or those who stole, or even if you disrespected your parents. Now, we can learn from these things as to how seriously, relatively seriously, each of those sins were seen to be, but those actual stipulations are not binding upon us because we are not a theocracy. We are not Israel. They were given for that time and that place to the people of God. And again, the specific penalties are not directly related back to God's character. Then the third aspect of the law, which is the one we were really talking about on Sunday, is the moral law. These are the commands that deal with our behaviors, not whether we eat shellfish or not whether we are exact what penalty we would ascribe to jaywalking or if you did eat shellfish, but rather the moral character and formation of people. And I remind you, as we've been seeing throughout the series, the moral aspect of the law is not in any way arbitrary. It is merely a reflection of God's character. Why do we respect authority? Because God tells us to respect authority, and He's built it into the entire universe. And God Himself, even among the persons of the Trinity, the Son submits to the Father. And so out of this principle comes in the moral law. God is a God who tells the truth, so we're not supposed to lie. God is a God who is faithful, so we don't commit adultery or sexually sin in other ways. God is a giving God, so we don't steal. Out of God's character, all of these laws flow, and because they come out of God's character, unlike the ceremonial aspect of the law, which was always intended to be temporary, or the civil aspect of the law, which was always intended to be temporary and only for Israel in her state as a theocracy in the Old Covenant, the moral aspect of the law is in fact eternal. It is always there because God does not change. The moral law does not change, and therefore what God expects of us does not change. This is why Paul tells us that even in places, for example, that did not receive the Old Testament scriptures, Paul said, but the law is still written on their hearts. He's speaking of the moral law there because when God created the universe, His very character is stamped on everything, and especially on we human beings who are the image bearers of God. So it was wrong to sin sexually, it was wrong to lie, it was wrong to dishonor our parents. The same things are wrong today, and should Jesus tarry, they'll be wrong 1,000 years from now. It does not matter what culture says, because these things do not change. So if a friend ever asks you, so then I guess you don't eat shellfish, I hope this is helpful for you in thinking through it, that we need to be very, very clear. Jesus set us free from the ceremonial aspects of the law, which were never moral, but he reinforces the moral law for us. It is still in effect, and we still need to walk by it, and it's actually where we will find our freedom and blessing. Hope this helps you. Hope you have a great week, and I look forward to us gathering together this week on Sunday. God bless.